It was the evening of October 14th, 1980, in Bologna. The city was restless, caught between the hum of late-night cafes and the uneasy silence of narrow medieval streets. The towers of Asinelli and Garicinda loomed in the distance, their shadows stretching long under the dim yellow street lamps. Somewhere beyond, the bells of San Petronio had already tolled 9. At 9:15 p.m., Elena Rossi, a 19-year-old literature student, was seen leaving the university library on Via Zamboni. She carried a worn leather satchel over her shoulder and clutched a slim paperback, Dante's Inferno, marked with folded pages. Witnesses later recalled that she wore a navy wool coat, patched at the elbows, and her shoes clicked lightly on the wet stones. The air smelled of rain, though the storm had passed hours earlier. She was supposed to walk the 15 minutes back to her small apartment near Piazza Santo Stefano. She never made it. When Elena failed to return, her roommate, Giulia Ferri, assumed she had stayed at the library to finish her notes. But when midnight came and the phone on their small wooden desk remained silent, Giulia grew uneasy. By morning, her worry turned to fear. She called the Questura di Bologna, the local police headquarters. Detective Inspector Marco Bellini, then only 33, was assigned the case. Bellini had the sharp profile of a man who seldom slept, with dark hair combed back and a permanent crease at his brow. He arrived at the Rossi household later that day. Elena's parents, Claudio and Maria Rossi, stood stiff in their small kitchen, surrounded by the smell of bitter espresso and the unspoken dread that their daughter would not simply stroll back through the door. Bellini began his methodical questions. What time was her last phone call? Did she have conflicts with anyone? Was there a boyfriend? Maria's hands trembled as she answered. No, Elena wasn't seeing anyone. She had dreams of teaching, of leaving Bologna one day for Florence, maybe even Paris. But in the coming days, contradictions surfaced. A bakery owner on Via Rizzoli swore he saw Elena walking past at 9:30 p.m., turning east toward Piazza Maggiore. Yet a bus driver claimed she boarded his bus briefly, asking if it stopped near Santo Stefano, then stepped off moments later. No other passengers remembered seeing her. And then there was the phone call. On October 15th, at 7:12 a.m., the Rossi family phone rang once, just once. Claudio picked it up, but the line was already dead. No words, no static, just silence. Was it Elena or someone else? Inspector Bellini ordered a trace, but in 1980, technology was slow. The call was logged only as unidentified. The Rossi family clung to the possibility that Elena was alive, reaching out in the only way she could. Meanwhile, the search widened. Flyers bearing Elena's photo, dark hair parted neatly at the center, eyes large and serious, were taped to lampposts, cafes, and bus stops. Students from the university organized candlelight vigils. The newspapers picked up the story. Student vanishes in Bologna's historic center. Rumors spiraled. Some whispered about political kidnappings, still fresh in Italy's memory after the Red Brigade's terror. Others insisted it was a crime of passion. But Bellini kept circling back to the last verifiable fact: Elena leaving the library. At the library desk, a clerk recalled Elena lingering by the entrance before stepping into the drizzle. The clerk remembered something odd, that a man in a gray trench coat had been standing just outside, smoking. No one recognized him. Bellini pressed harder. Who was the man? Why was he watching the entrance? No one could say. The case file grew thick, stuffed with witness statements, maps of her possible routes, and grainy photographs. But evidence remained thin. No belongings of Elena's were found. Her satchel, her book, her coat, all gone, as if she had simply dissolved into Bologna's damp October night. And yet, one small detail would haunt Bellini. 2 weeks later, Elena's satchel surfaced. Not in a dark alley, not in a river, but neatly placed on a bench in the Giardini Margherita, the city's central park. Inside, her notebook, a half-used train ticket to Florence, and the copy of Dante's Inferno, its final page dog-eared. But her apartment keys and her student ID were missing. Someone had staged this, left a message. The satchel was dry, despite the rain that had fallen the night before, which meant it had been placed there recently. By whom? By the end of episode 1. The question is clear. Did Elena choose to disappear, or did someone carefully script her absence? And who placed her satchel on that park bench? An act of cruelty, or a cry for attention? In the silence of Bologna's stone streets, the mystery of Elena Rossi had only begun. The reappearance of Elena's satchel in the Giardini Margherita electrified the investigation. For Inspector Marco Bellini, it was no longer a simple missing person case. It had become a message. But from whom? The satchel was clean, dry, and intact. The objects inside, her notebook, a half-used train ticket to Florence, Dante's Inferno, were arranged too neatly, almost ceremonially. Missing were her keys, her student ID, and most importantly, the pen she carried everywhere. A slim blue fountain pen, given to her by her father on her high school graduation. To Maria Rossi, that detail cut deepest. She never went anywhere without that pen, Maria told Bellini, voice trembling. The discovery reignited talk of the silent phone call. Claudio Rossi replayed the moment over and over in his mind. The shrill ring at 7:12 a.m., his rushed hand lifting the receiver, his strained pronto, and then nothing. Just the faint hum of an open line, cut abruptly. Was it Elena reaching out? Or someone taunting them? Bellini ordered his team to cross-reference calls around that time. The central exchange could only narrow it down to a public booth. Bologna was full of them, metallic boxes smeared with fingerprints, plastered with posters for concerts and political rallies. And yet, one witness claimed that on the morning of October 15th, a young woman matching Elena's description was seen stepping into a booth on Via Castiglione, fumbling coins in her hand. The witness, an elderly man walking his dog, admitted he wasn't certain. Maybe it was her. Maybe I imagined it. Confusion deepened. At the Rossi apartment, reporters gathered outside the doorway, pressing microphones into the faces of family members. Maria shut the curtains and lit candles by Elena's bedside. The room was untouched. The scent of lavender soap, stacks of university papers, postcards pinned above the desk. Florence, Paris, Rome. Dreams of a life just beginning. Now, frozen in time. Bellini turned to Elena's closest circle. He pressed Julia, her roommate, for details. Julia remembered Elena had been distracted in the weeks before she vanished. She'd stare out the window during dinner. Sometimes she'd leave the apartment late, saying she needed air. I asked where she went, but she never answered. Had Elena been hiding something? Bellini broadened his interviews. In the university cafeteria, one student recalled Elena chatting with a man none of them knew, a tall figure with a gray trench coat, the same description given by the library clerk. But the conversation had been hushed, hurried. Another student swore Elena had asked about train schedules to Florence 2 days before she vanished. The Florence ticket in her satchel now seemed deliberate. But was it a plan she never carried out? or a breadcrumb placed to mislead. By late October, whispers in the city thickened. Bologna was no stranger to shadows. Just 2 months earlier, the scars of the train station bombing still marked its streets. People feared everything could be political. Could Elena's disappearance tie into that unrest? Or was it something personal, intimate, hidden in her private life? Bellini's gut told him to focus closer. He revisited the phone records, and that's when something startling surfaced. The Rossi family had received another strange call, 3 nights after Elena's disappearance, at 2:43 a.m. This time, no one had picked up. The phone had rung just twice, then stopped. Claudio, half asleep, thought it was a wrong number. The details slipped his mind until Bellini asked again. When investigators pulled the call logs, the origin stunned them. The call had come from a payphone directly across from the Rossi apartment. Whoever made it stood within sight of their windows. The implication was chilling. Had Elena been there, just meters away, unable to enter? Or was someone watching, toying with the family's hope? Bellini visited the booth personally. Scratched glass, the lingering smell of cigarettes. He pressed the receiver to his ear, hearing nothing but the hollow buzz of emptiness. He closed his eyes and imagined. A young woman, panicked, coins clattering into the slot, eyes darting over her shoulder. Or a man, expressionless, feeding a cruel game. The city buzzed with theories. Letters trickled into the newspaper. Anonymous writers claiming Elena was alive, hidden, planning to flee. Others insisted she was dead. The police followed each lead, only to meet dead ends. Still, the satchel and the phone calls formed a pattern Bellini could not ignore. Whoever was behind this wanted to communicate, but in riddles. The inspector returned to his desk one rain-soaked evening, exhaustion weighing on him. He flipped open Elena's notebook, taken from the satchel. Most pages were notes on Dante, but on the final page, in her looping handwriting, was a line underlined twice. Nel mezzo del cammin di nostra vita, mi ritrovi per una selva oscura. Midway upon the journey of our life, I found myself within a dark forest. Was it a literary note? Or had Elena left a message of her own? Bellini leaned back in his chair. Outside, Bologna's bells tolled midnight. He thought of the girl with the satchel, the calls in the night, the trench-coated figure, and the notebook's final line. The forest was dark, but somewhere within it, there had to be a path. And then, just as Bellini began to wonder if the case was already going cold, another piece of evidence surfaced. A bus ticket collector stepped forward. He remembered Elena that night. He was certain. She had boarded his bus after all. She had spoken to someone, quietly, urgently, and then she stepped off near the old canal district. But who was she speaking to? And why the canal, a place known for its twisting, hidden alleyways? The case was about to take a darker turn. The testimony of the bus ticket collector reframed everything. For days, investigators had argued over conflicting accounts. Was Elena walking alone, boarding a bus, meeting someone? Now, finally, there was certainty. On the night of October 14th, Elena Rossi had stepped onto the number 30 bus. She had spoken to someone, and she had gotten off in the Canal District, a part of Bologna that was dark, narrow, and unforgiving. The collector remembered her vividly. She looked nervous, he told Inspector Bellini, kept glancing to the back of the bus. She spoke to a man for less than a minute, then pressed the bell and got off near Via del Molin. He didn't follow her. He stayed on board. Who was that man? Bellini ordered a sweep of passenger lists. Though in 1980, there were no electronic records, only ticket stubs and the collector's fading memory. The man, he said, was older, maybe late 30s, wearing a gray trench coat. The same figure seen outside the library. The trail was no longer just about Elena. It was about the man in the trench coat. Bellini's team canvassed via Delmaline. The canal still ran there, covered by streets, the air damp with the smell of algae and beer from nearby taverns. The alleys twisted like a maze. If Elena had gotten off there, why? Did she know someone who lived in the district? Or had she been lured? Witnesses in the neighborhood were hesitant. One bar owner admitted he'd seen a young woman walk past that night, coat pulled tight, eyes forward. She looked like she was trying not to be noticed. A moment later, he remembered a man following at a distance. He couldn't describe him well, only the long coat, the way the fabric swung as he turned into the shadows. The city's fear sharpened. The newspapers latched onto the image, the phantom in the trench coat. Bologna whispered about him. Was he real, or a specter invented by anxious minds? Back at the Rossi apartment, Maria Rossi grew pale whenever Bellini asked about men in Elena's life. She was shy, Maria insisted. She had her studies. There was no one. But Julia, the roommate, offered a contradiction. Weeks earlier, Elena had confided someone had been watching her. She told me she felt eyes on her when she walked home. She joked about it, but she wasn't laughing. Bellini pressed. Had Elena described him? Julia hesitated, then nodded. A man in a coat, always standing near the library or the cafe by the piazza. Never close enough to speak. Just there. The pattern grew darker. Still, Bellini had only fragments. No names, no addresses, just the ghost of a man weaving through Bologna streets. So he turned to what he had, the satchel. Forensic technicians dusted it again. At first, nothing. But under a fresh lamp, faint prints emerged on the notebook's cover. Too smudged to lift properly. But they were not Elena's. Someone else had touched the book. Bellini imagined the scene. Someone handling her things. Someone deciding what to return, what to keep. Why the student ID? Why the keys? And why leave Dante's Inferno behind, as if daring them to interpret the words? Then, a new lead broke through the fog. A university secretary came forward, saying a man had once visited the registrar's office, asking about Elena. He had no business being there. He wasn't staff, nor a student. But he lingered by the bulletin board, staring at her class schedule. When asked to leave, he slipped out without a word. And yes, he wore a gray coat. Bellini tightened the net. Bologna's gray coats were suddenly suspect. Men walking to work, men smoking outside cafes, men waiting for buses, all scrutinized. But in a city of thousands, how do you isolate one shadow from another? The Rossi family received another cruel twist. One evening, Claudio opened the mailbox to find an envelope with no return address. Inside was a single page torn from a book, a passage highlighted in blue ink. Abandon every hope, you who enter here. Hell's Gate. From Dante. The ink matched the fountain pen Elena always carried. Bellini's team studied the page obsessively. Was it Elena herself writing, under duress? Or the trench coat man mimicking her? The uncertainty gnawed at everyone. Public pressure mounted. Politicians demanded swift answers. Families of other young women whispered their own fears. If it happened to Elena, could it happen to anyone? Bologna, with its arcades and lanterns, began to feel less like a city and more like a trap. And then, just as suspicion turned toward strangers, a chilling possibility arose. A neighbor of the Rossi family reported something odd. On the very night Elena vanished, around 10 o'clock, he saw a man standing across the street from their building. Not moving, just staring up at the windows. He thought it strange, but assumed it was nothing. The description? Average height, 30s, a long gray coat. If true, it meant the figure wasn't confined to the library or the bus routes. He knew where Elena lived. He knew her family. He may have been watching far longer than anyone realized. Bellini sat at his desk long after midnight, chain-smoking, staring at the evidence pinned on the board. Elena's photo, the satchel, the phone calls, the page from Dante, and now, the trench coat, weaving through every thread. But who was he? A stranger who chose Elena at random? A stalker growing bold? Or someone much closer, hiding in plain sight? The inspector leaned forward, exhausted, but his instincts sharpened. To find Elena, they had to find a man. And if the man had watched her so closely, perhaps he was watching others, too. The question hung heavy in the air. How many eyes in Bologna had already glimpsed the trench coat and simply dismissed it as nothing? And in the next days, a woman would come forward, claiming she had been followed too. The first weeks of November in Bologna brought cold rain, the kind that slicked the cobblestones and left the arcades glistening under orange streetlights. The city was moving on from Elena Rossi's disappearance, or so it seemed. But Inspector Marco Bellini knew the case was far from over. The man in the trench coat had become more than a suspect. He was a shadow threaded through every account, every sighting, every whispered rumor. And then, just as the investigation seemed to stall, another voice cut through the silence. Her name was Lucia Bianchi, 22 years old, a student in the Faculty of Economics. She arrived at the questura trembling, her scarf pulled tightly around her face. She insisted she had seen something that made her sure she could no longer stay quiet. She told Bellini that 2 weeks before Elena vanished, she herself had been followed. "It started when I left my evening lecture," Lucia said. "I walked toward Via Rizzoli. I felt someone behind me. Every time I slowed, he slowed. Every time I turned, he was there." When Bellini asked for a description, her words chilled him. He wore a gray coat, tall, silent. I never saw his face clearly, but I knew he was watching me. Lucia explained that she had darted into a crowded cafe and waited there until he was gone. She had not reported it then, afraid the police would dismiss it as imagination. But when she saw Elena's photo in the papers, the resemblance to her own experience was too striking to ignore. Bellini leaned forward. "Did you ever see him again?" Lucia nodded reluctantly. "Yes, once, outside the university gates. He was just standing there, smoking, watching the students." The inspector's notebook filled quickly. A pattern was forming. Elena had confided in her roommate about being watched. Now Lucia was saying the same. If the trench coat man was stalking multiple women, Elena might not have been his only target. But what tied him to her specifically? The team combed through student records. Had anyone recently transferred? Was there a man lingering on campus without clear purpose? Clerks remembered a figure haunting notice boards, always at the edges, never enrolling. But no name surfaced. Meanwhile, the Rossi family was crumbling under the pressure. Maria no longer slept in her own bed, preferring to keep vigil by the phone, hoping it would ring. Claudio stopped working at the mechanic shop, pacing their small apartment instead, smoking cigarette after cigarette. Their home smelled of ash and cold coffee. And then, the silent torment continued. Another phone call. November 5th, 11:41 p.m. 3 rings. When Claudio picked up, again, nothing but the faint hum of an open line. Then a soft click. The operator later confirmed it came from a payphone near the university gates. The same place Lucia had seen the trenchcoat figure. Bellini felt the circle tightening. Whoever was behind this was not hiding far. He was circling the same locations: the library, the buses, the Rossi home, the university gates. A predator marking his territory. At the same time, journalists were growing impatient. The Corriere di Bologna ran a headline: "The Phantom in the Gray Coat, Police Without Leads." Students demanded more patrols. Parents forbade their daughters from walking alone. Fear seeped into the city like fog. But Bellini had something. The bus collector's testimony placed Elena speaking to someone before stepping off in the Canal District. And now, Lucia's story tied the same trenchcoat figure to stalking behavior. If Elena had trusted, or been forced, to meet him there, perhaps the truth lay hidden among the twisting alleys of Via del Molin. One cold morning, Bellini and two plainclothes officers staked out the Canal District. They watched from under the arcades, smoke curling from their cigarettes, eyes scanning the crowds. Hours passed. Rain slicked the pavement. And then Bellini saw him, or thought he did. A tall man in a gray coat, standing at the corner, collar turned up. He smoked slowly, gaze fixed on the people passing by. When the officers moved toward him, he slipped into the labyrinth of side streets. By the time they reached the spot, he was gone. Only a cigarette but smoldered on the ground, flattened under a shoe. The encounter left Bellini both frustrated and certain. This wasn't imagination. The man was real, and he knew the city too well, moving through its veins unseen. That night, Bellini returned to his office, the rain tapping against the window. He laid out the case once more. The satchel, the Dante passage, the phone calls, the trench coat. And now, Lucia Bianchi, who had survived her own brush with the same shadow. But one question refused to leave his mind. Why the page from Dante? Why those words? Was it meant for the police, the family, or Elena herself? And then came a breakthrough, almost by accident. A librarian, dusting through returned books, found something unusual. Inside another copy of Inferno, a slip of paper, the same handwriting as the torn page delivered to the Rossi home. A message scrawled in haste. She walked still, but in silence. The librarian reported it immediately. For Bellini, it was both hope and horror. Was Elena alive, forced into silence? Or was this another cruel taunt from a faceless man? Either way, the trail was no longer cold. It was burning. And the next lead would push Bellini to confront whether the trenchcoat figure was not just an intruder into Elena's life, but possibly someone embedded much closer to her world than anyone dared to admit. By mid-November 1980, Bologna felt like a city under siege. The headlines screamed about the phantom in the trenchcoat. Students hurried home in groups, the arcades echoing with quickened footsteps. The Rossi family clung to hope, but their faces bore the exhaustion of endless waiting. For Inspector Marco Bellini, the pressure was crushing. Every lead, every call, every page of Dante teased him with possibility, but nothing solid. The Canal District, Via del Molin, with its twisting alleys and shuttered windows, kept pulling him back. It was here that Elena had been last seen, stepping off the bus, speaking urgently to someone. It was here the trenchcoat figure had been spotted. Bellini knew he had to return, not as an investigator walking broad daylight, but as prey, testing the predator's path. On the night of November 18th, he walked those streets alone. The canal water, barely visible through grated openings, stank of mildew. Rain tapped against the stone archways. In the distance, laughter spilled from a bar, but the alleys themselves were deserted. Bellini listened to the sound of his own shoes on wet stone and imagined Elena's that night. Light, hurried, nervous. Did she pause? Did she look over her shoulder? Halfway down the street, he felt it. That prickling between the shoulders. The sense of being watched. He turned sharply, but only the shadow of a drainpipe leaned against the wall. Still, he could have sworn he heard another step, just one, echoing his own. The patrols had found little here in daylight, but Bellini sensed the district held its secrets in the dark. The next morning, a fresh lead surfaced. A bartender in the area admitted to police he had seen Elena before, not on the night she vanished, but a week earlier. She had come in briefly, speaking with a man who ordered a grappa. The man wore a gray coat. When shown photographs of various locals, the bartender hesitated, then shook his head. Not from here. A stranger. A stranger, but one who returned often enough to be remembered. Bellini had his men comb the taverns and boarding houses. In one cheap pensione on Via San Vitale, the receptionist recalled a guest from October. Quiet, solitary, always in a coat. He gave his name as Johnny Marchetti, but the address he left on the register was false. The handwriting, when compared to the Dante page, bore similarities. Was Marchetti the phantom, or just another false lead? The name went into the file, but Bellini remained cautious. Too often, shadows dissolved when chased. Meanwhile, another blow hit the Rossi family. On November 20th, Claudio discovered their front door slightly ajar when returning home. Nothing was stolen, nothing broken, but Maria swore she had locked it. On the kitchen table, she found a matchbox. Inside, 2 bus tickets, both dated October 14th. One punched, one not. No note, no explanation. The implication was unmistakable. Someone had been inside their home, watching, delivering his next cryptic message. Bellini held the tickets in his hand, the paper soft, slightly damp. If real, they confirmed what the collector had said. Elena boarded the bus. But why leave them here, in her parents' kitchen, a month later? To prove he was always one step ahead? The city buzzed with paranoia. Women reported being followed. Men in coats eyed suspiciously on every corner. Bellini knew he risked chasing shadows, but something about those tickets gnawed at him. The second ticket, and used, suggested 2 journeys. 2 people. Had Elena planned to go with someone? Or had someone lured her with the promise of travel? The Dante connection also deepened. Scholars Bellini consulted explained that the highlighted line, "Abandon every hope, you who enter here," was often used symbolically for thresholds, moments of crossing. The message hidden in the library book, "She walks still, but in silence," seemed like a deliberate echo. Someone was staging a literary game. Someone who knew Dante as intimately as Elena did. Then came the testimony that shifted the case. An old woman living above the canal swore she saw a girl that night. Through her shutters, she glimpsed a figure hurriedly crossing the street, accompanied by a man. The girl matched Elena's description, the coat, the satchel. The man? Yes, she said. A coat. Gray. His arm around her shoulder, not in affection, but in control. He was guiding her, the woman whispered, like someone leading a child who didn't want to go. If true, Elena had not walked into the canal district alone. Bellini returned to the spot, standing in the rain, imagining the moment. A young woman, pulled into the labyrinth, the city oblivious around her. The river beneath the cobblestones, running silently on. The inspector felt the pressure mounting. Marchetti's name, the trench coat, the canal, the messages, it was all tightening like a noose. But still no body, no ransom, no proof of life. Until the next morning. A package arrived at the Questura. Plain brown paper, addressed to Bellini himself. Inside, Elena's fountain pen. The blue lacquer glistened, unmistakable, but it was broken in half. And beneath it, a single scrap of paper. Paradise is not for her. Bellini's blood ran cold. The messages had shifted. No longer Inferno. Now Paradiso. The implication was direct. Elena had not simply vanished into the dark forest of Dante's words. She was being kept there. And if the phantom was escalating, the next move might not be a message, but something far worse. The broken pen shook Bologna like an earthquake. For the Rossi family, it was devastation. Maria recognized it instantly. Elena's favorite, the one she used to write notes in her journals. To see it snapped, mailed in silence, was like watching hope itself shatter. For Inspector Marco Bellini, it was proof. Proof Elena had been alive long enough for someone to take it from her. Proof the phantom wanted to be heard. But why now? Why escalate after weeks of quiet? Bellini spread the evidence across his desk, maps pinned with red strings, the Dante passages underlined, the matchbox of bus tickets sitting like a taunt. The shift from Inferno to Paradiso gnawed at him. Was the kidnapper signaling stages, like Dante's journey through the afterlife? Inferno, then Paradiso, but never Purgatorio. Where then was Elena trapped? A new tip arrived 2 days later, November 23rd. A farmhand from outside Bologna, near the fields of Budrio, came forward nervously. He claimed that late at night, he had seen a man in a gray coat walking along the road. The man carried something heavy, perhaps a bundle, into an abandoned farmhouse known to locals as La Casa Rosa, the Red House. The next morning, when the farmhand passed by again, the shutters had been closed, though the house had long been uninhabited. Bellini drove out himself. The countryside was cold, fog curling low over the fields. The Red House stood isolated, its paint faded, windows boarded. Crows perched on the roofline. He entered with 2 officers, boots crunching on broken glass. Inside, the air was damp, smelling of rot and straw. On the ground floor, empty bottles lay scattered. Upstairs, in a corner room, they found something chilling. A child's chair, small, placed beside a table with melted candle wax. And on the wall, scratched in a plaster, lines from Dante, written faintly in charcoal. Not Inferno this time, but Purgatorio. The man who waits and looks and hopes. The words sent a tremor through Bellini. Why was the phantom circling back to Purgatorio when his letter had already leapt to Paradiso? Was he mocking the police, feeding contradictions? Or was this house merely one stop in a longer passage? No trace of Elena was found. No blood, no fibers, nothing to prove she had been there. Yet the impression of presence was undeniable. Someone had been sitting in that chair, reading by candlelight, etching poetry onto walls in the dead of night. When shown the words, Maria Rossi whispered. That was one of Elena's favorite passages. So was it her hand, or the phantom mimicking her, twisting her love of Dante into a cruel theater? Meanwhile, Bellini's inquiries into Johnny Marchetti deepened. Official records showed no man by that name in Bologna. But in Milan, a drifter with that alias had once been questioned in connection with a theft of books from a university library. A lover of rare texts, an eccentric, obsessed with Dante. The description matched. A coat, gaunt face, soft-spoken, but unsettling. But before Bellini could pursue Milan, the Rossi family received another message. Claudio found it pinned to the garden gate, a single envelope. Inside, a Polaroid photograph, grainy. A young woman, head bowed, hair obscuring her face, hands tied loosely in front of her. Behind her, unmistakable, the cracked plaster of the Red House. Maria collapsed when she saw it. Bellini studied every pixel, but the photo was cropped cruelly. No clear features, no certainty it was Elena. But the satchel on the floor beside the chair, it looked like hers. The message on the back of the photo read only, "She waits." The farmhand's story gained sudden weight. The Red House wasn't just a ruin. It was a stage, a place where Elena, or her phantom double, had been kept, however briefly. Bellini returned at dusk, sitting outside the house in silence, waiting for movement. Hours passed. The fog thickened. An owl cried. Then, faintly, a figure approached from the field. Gray coat, moving with deliberate steps. Bellini's heart surged. He raised his pistol, but the figure slipped into the mist, vanishing between rows of trees. The inspector gave chase, stumbling over furrows, shouting. The coat flitted ahead, a ghost, and then gone. When he returned to the red house, breathless, his men waiting at the door, Bellini found something new on the table. It hadn't been there before. A page torn from a book. Dante again, this time from Paradiso. The love that moves the sun and the other stars. But across the margin, in Elena's handwriting, or what looked like it, one word had been scrawled. Help. Was it genuine or forged? The strokes trembled, uncertain, but the possibility that Elena herself had written it turned the case into an obsession. Bellini felt time slipping. The phantom was no longer just mocking. He was communicating directly, shifting between Inferno, Purgatorio, and Paradiso like a conductor orchestrating fear. And with each message, Elena's fate seemed to blur further between life and death. The inspector stared at the page under lamplight that night, exhausted. If she was alive, where was she? If she was gone, why keep playing? And then came the call that shattered the fragile quiet. A fisherman on the Reno River reported finding something tangled in reeds near the bank. A coat. Gray. The gray coat pulled from the Reno River was soaked, heavy with silt, its pockets clogged with reeds. To the fisherman who spotted it, it was just discarded fabric, but to Inspector Marco Bellini, it was a punch to the chest. He lifted it with gloved hands, turning it in the weak winter light. The smell of river mud clung to it. The buttons rusted, but the outline was unmistakable. The phantom's coat. At least, it matched every description. Forensic technicians examined it under harsh lamps. Fibers revealed nothing decisive. No blood, no hair, no fingerprints. But in the left pocket, waterlogged but still intact, they found a small scrap of paper. Once dried, faint words emerged. Another Dante passage, handwritten, but not in Elena's delicate script. This was bolder, jagged. Abandon every hope, you who enter here. The phrase, Inferno's most famous line, was now defaced by water stains. Bellini stared at it, hearing Maria Rossi's voice echo in his mind. That was her favorite pen, her passage. The phantom seemed to be circling back, almost closing the loop, beginning where it had started. But why throw the coat away? Why leave it to be found? The Rossi family reeled. To Maria, the coat in the river was an omen, that Elena was gone, drowned, discarded like a piece of clothing. To Claudio, it was proof of manipulation. If he wanted us to think she's dead, Claudio insisted, then she's alive. His defiance trembled between hope and desperation. The press had caught wind of the discovery. Headlines screamed, Phantom drowning? Coat in Reno tied to Elena case. Crowds gathered near the Rossi home, candles burning on the gate. Some whispered that Elena's ghost walked the riverbank at night. Bologna was a city of sleepless eyes. Bellini worked relentlessly, turning to the name that had surfaced again and again, Johnny Marchetti. Records placed him once in Milan, linked to a theft of Dante texts. But the inspector now discovered something darker. Marchetti had been admitted briefly to a psychiatric hospital in Parma in the late 1970s. Diagnosis: delusional fixation, literary mania. He believed he was a pilgrim like Dante, passing through realms of sin and salvation. He was discharged after only 6 months. No follow-up, no address. A ghost on paper. A ghost now haunting Bologna. On November 30th, just as Bellini prepared to pursue the Parma lead, A new shock arrived at the Rossi household. A cassette tape. No letter, no envelope, just the cassette in a plain box, left on their doorstep. Claudio brought it, shaking, to the police station. The tape was played in a closed room. At first, static, then faintly a voice. A young woman's voice. Trembling, rushed. It was only a few words, muffled, but it sounded like Elena. Mama, I'll wait. And then another voice cut in. Male, calm, reciting in flawless cadence. In his will is our peace. The line for Paradiso. The tape ended in silence. Maria sobbed as she listened, pressing her hands to her mouth. Was it truly Elena? The timbre, the softness, it felt like her. But the quality was so poor, the sound warped. Could have been faked. Bellini sat in the dim control room, fists clenched. If authentic, it meant Elena was alive as late as November 30th. If staged, it was cruelty of the highest order. The inspector ordered the tape analyzed. Background noise suggested an enclosed space, perhaps stone walls, faint dripping water. No traffic, no birds. Underground? A cellar? His mind turned to the red house again, but the acoustics didn't fit. That farmhouse had hollow wooden echoes, not damp stone. Could there be another site? Another hidden room? At the same time, the investigation into Marchetti advanced. Witnesses in Parma remembered him. A man with restless eyes, muttering lines of Dante in the cafeteria. One attendant recalled him sketching drawings of staircases, claiming they were the circles of hell. And one chilling detail, Marchetti often spoke of rivers. The river as passage, he had said. One must drown or rise. The Reno River. The coat. The script. It aligned like puzzle pieces, but without Elena, it was still unfinished. On December 3rd, Bellini made a decision. He and his team would stake out the red house again, wading through the fog. He refused to let the phantom dictate time. For 3 nights, they kept watch. Silence. On the 4th, at 2:14 a.m., headlights appeared on the distant road. A van, dark, unmarked. It slowed near the red house. Bellini's pulse spiked. He signaled silence. The van idled, then backed toward the rear of the property. A figure stepped out. Gray hair, thin frame, a face gaunt with sharp angles. He carried a lantern in one hand, moving with deliberate, ritual-like pace. Johnny Marchetti. At last, the phantom had a face. Bellini moved in. Officers advanced through fog, boots crunching, pistols drawn. Marchetti froze in the lantern light. For a heartbeat, he simply smiled, calm, almost serene. Then he bolted, darting into the ruin. The chase thundered through corridors, up broken stairs. Shadows leapt across cracked walls. Marchetti moved with startling speed, slipping like smoke, reciting fragments of Dante as he ran. The dark forest, the straight way lost. Bellini lunged, nearly catching his coat, but Marchetti hurled himself through a broken window, shattering glass, landing in the field below. Officers scrambled after him, but by the time they reached the ground, he was gone into the mist. Only one thing remained behind in the red house. On the table where the candle had once melted, a fresh object sat. Elena's rosary. Bellini lifted it slowly, heart hammering. The beads were warm, as if they had only just been held. The phantom was close, too close. And now, for the first time, Bellini knew his name, his face, and his madness. But would that be enough to bring Elena home? Or had Marchetti already carried her into his own vision of hell? The mountain air was thin and sharp, a blade of cold pressing against every breath. The Apennines loomed in darkness, their slopes dotted with skeletal trees and the faint glow of a hunter's moon. It was here, in this forgotten clearing, that Inspector Luca Bellini found himself staring into the abyss of a mystery that had stretched for 2 relentless months. Elena Rossi was alive. That single fact had been enough to ignite the city of Bologna in a fever of relief. Bells ringing from San Petronio, candles flickering in shop windows, her name whispered with reverence in the crowded piazzas. But the joy was fragile, paper-thin, because the man who had taken her, the shadow they had all come to call the Phantom, would never stand trial. Marco Marchetti lay dead in the damp soil of the clearing, a bullet from Bellini's own pistol lodged deep in his chest. The sound of that gunshot still rang inside Bellini's skull, replaying with the cruel precision of memory. He had pulled the trigger, yes, but the inspector knew. Justice had not truly been served. Marchetti's silence was permanent, and silence hides answers. What had driven him? Why Elena, among so many? And why the notebook they had found hidden in his abandoned flat? A tattered ledger scrawled with dates, symbols, and a single recurring name that no one yet understood. Elena could not tell them. She remembered fragments, the iron smell of the cabin walls, the hiss of a gas lamp, the sound of leather boots pacing just outside her locked door. She recalled being fed soup in chipped bowls, a hand leaving the tray, but never the face attached to it. She spoke of hymns sung softly in the night, words in Latin she didn't recognize, and always that same smell of burning pine. The forensic team combed the cabin inch by inch. They found rope fibers, cigarette butts, a scattering of Polaroid photographs that had been burned in a metal drum. The snow had swallowed most of the footprints. Yet the investigators were certain Marchetti hadn't lived here alone. The cabin pantry contained food supplies for 2, not 1. 2 sleeping pallets, not 1. And among the ashes in the stove, Bellini's team recovered something he could never unsee. A delicate silver locket, engraved with the initials AM. It was not Elena's. Had Marchetti worked with someone else? An accomplice, perhaps a mentor, perhaps a woman whose shadow moved just beyond reach? Or was the second presence merely imagined by Elena in her state of captivity? The questions stacked upon themselves like bricks, walling off any sense of resolution. Bologna wanted closure, but Bellini could not give it. He had only fragments, broken mirrors reflecting back fear and obsession. In April of 1980, Elena Rossi returned home to her parents' apartment near Via Rizzoli. Reporters mobbed the stairwell, flashbulbs bursting like small explosions. But inside, behind the shutters, silence reigned. Elena barely spoke. She drifted from room to room like a ghost. When neighbors visited, she only nodded politely, hands tucked into the sleeves of her cardigan, as though still afraid of the cold mountain nights. The police files grew heavier. Witness statements, forensic notes, timelines. Each page carried the weight of a city desperate to understand how a young woman could vanish in the heart of Bologna, be hidden away in the hills, and then return changed forever. And yet, there was something no one could ignore. In Marchetti's ledger, the final entry was dated 2 days before Elena's rescue. The words scrawled there in his uneven hand, non è finita. It is not over. Bellini still wakes to those words. He remembers Elena's hollow eyes, Marchetti's blood on the forest floor, the silver locket cooling in his gloved palm. He remembers the silence of the mountains and the echo of something unfinished. So is this case ever truly solved? The official record will tell you yes. Elena Rossi was found, her abductor killed, her life restored. But speak to the families who leave candles at the edge of the Piazza Maggiore, Or to the inspector who still keeps the notebook locked in his desk, and you'll hear a different answer. The phantom is dead, but the shadows he left behind still breathe. And as for Elena Rossi, her voice, soft, halting, the first time she spoke to the press, she said only this: "I came back, but part of me is still missing." And that is where her story ends. Or perhaps where it only begins.